Hey everyone, welcome to the show. A Sunday night one. Usually I've been doing these during the day, but now it's June, roughly a month away from the off season, and with the finals spacing things out a little more, we can start doing some of these later. So thanks for joining. I'm Yossi Goslin, NBA salary cap analyst. This is team 25, no, 24 of my off-season preview series. And today we're going to do the Milwaukee Bucks. Make sure you follow me on Twitter, Blue Sky. My name, Yossi Goslin. I'm going to be reacting to all sorts of transactions as they happen over the next month. Make sure to subscribe to my newsletter, Third Apron. And joining me to discuss the Bucks today, one of the best guys covering them. You can hear him talk about the Bucks regularly on Locked On Bucks. Frank Madden. Frank, thank you for joining. And how are you doing?
I'm doing pretty well. We were trying to make this work for a while, and I had power outage for like 5 days. So it's been an eventful week in my life, but not really for the Milwaukee Bucks. So yeah, I think we kept waiting to see if maybe something would happen with Giannis, but here we are. Still kind of waiting for the largest shoe to drop, maybe in the whole NBA offseason with Giannis and the Bucks.
Yes, and I would say that the pace that this is going is about what I expected. I really don't expect us to really get any clarity until at least the week of the draft, and I wouldn't be surprised if this drags even later. Um, but it's good to check in once in a while. I think it's been so like the whole timeline. It's been roughly a month since the Bucks got eliminated, and no even reporting that he what he wants to do. Just the general media, everyone kind of just came to the same conclusion. Well, it's kind of hard to see where the Bucks go from here, continuing with them. Then about 3 weeks ago, Shams reported that now Giannis has, quote, become open-minded about considering opportunities outside of Milwaukee. And then I think later that week, Chris Haynes reported that the Bucks and Giannis were set to meet. No follow-up on that yet, so we're still in this holding pattern as far as what's going to happen, what he wants to do. We know that the Bucks aren't going to trade him unless he specifically asks for it. But I want to know, first of all, what you think, just given the roster, their general situation, limitations, lack of draft picks and like valuable players, their cap situation, which actually is a little better than the past few years. But do you think there is a pathway to salvage somewhat of a competitive window while keeping Giannis at least the next year?
I mean, I think just given kind of where they are, obviously we'll get probably a little bit into what they can do this summer, but probably the best case scenario is you've got a full non-tax mid-level to work with. Certainly feels like even if Giannis stays, that they've been in the repeater here the last couple of years. This is an opportunity to move back under the tax for the first time. Obviously, if you're using the non-tax mid-level or potentially the BAE, obviously you're going to be hard capped at the first apron regardless. But they've spent an absolute ton of money, these last few years going over the tax and being a second apron team up until the Middleton trade, which got them back under. So that's part of this whole dance, right? Is I'm sure ownership, given they've had nothing to show for it these last few years, they would love to try to get to a more rational salary and kind of cap number this summer. But obviously with Giannis, like he has, not been bashful about keeping pressure on the Bucks, really going back to like, 2019, 2020. On the one hand, I think Bucks fans always get tired of the media obviously looking for any reason possible to try to talk about him leaving. But he's fed the narrative also by what he's said and not said at times. And same thing now, obviously now it's really about what he hasn't said. If at any point he says like, Milwaukee's my home and, I want to stick it out, whatever, then obviously this will go away at least for a few months. It's never fully going to go away, by the way. I mean, he's going to be in trade rumors until either he retires or leaves Milwaukee. But yeah, I mean, I think as you said, again, if you're looking 7-10 year like window, if you're completely objective, dispassionate about his history with the franchise, you might say, well, really like this may be in their best interest if he asks out and they can reset with draft picks and young players and all that. Because I think to answer your question, I mean, finding a way for them to be more than like a 42 win team that is in the lower half of the East playoff seating, I think it's kind of hard to see much more than that. I mean, even with Dame, obviously, and while not certainly not a perfect roster or a high end roster around them, they led the league in 3-point shooting last year. They had guys that I think complemented Giannis and Dame pretty well, and they couldn't get to 50 wins, right? They couldn't get out of the first round here now, 3 years in a row. So to say that like you're going to lose Dame and somehow use mid levels and BAEs and stuff to now be better next year, I mean, or even the same, I think that's obviously just a really tall order. Especially if Doc Rivers is still around and you don't have some revolutionary new brilliant coach that like magically gets more out of the guys you have. So I think that's kind of where my head is there's maybe some stuff they can do with some of those exceptions. Maybe there's some trade. I think there's a big existential question, like, is there some scenario where they would put their 2031 first into play? I've sort of been assuming they wouldn't do that, just given everything seems so year to year right now. But certainly that's like the last kind of big thing that they could do in terms of trying to make a trade. But even if they did that, like, what exactly are you going to get if you put that into play, given your salary make weight is like Cal Kuzma, right? Like Cal Kuzma plus the 2031 first. Does that get you some huge haul? Don't think so. So yeah, I think they're just in a tough spot. And honestly, I think they're really having to make the case to Giannis that, hey, you like having the ball in your hands and putting up huge stats and having the world revolve around your incredible talents. I think you have to play to his ego a little bit and see if he basically just sort of says, yeah, I'm loyal. I don't want to leave, kind of go out the way he would be going out if he were to leave, and that he is willing to kind of put up with obviously a team that does not have title contending aspirations or talent next year. But so they're in a really tough spot. I mean, there's no way two ways around it. And you can call it a gap year next year, but like Dame coming back at 36 off a torn Achilles, like, I mean, it's not like that's going to be some life altering addition either, right? And again, not to count Dame out or what he might do with his rehab. So yeah, they're just in tough spots. I think it's just a huge question for Giannis. Like, what is his ambition? Realistically, he probably doesn't win a championship wherever he goes next. His legacy, I don't know. It's really, it gets down to his legacy and what he wants to do, how he wants to be remembered. And whatever he does, most Bucks fans, I think, are totally accepting of that. But yeah, that's obviously the huge question. And if he decides that he wants to do something elsewhere, you'll have obviously a lot of teams that would happily line up and make some huge offers for him.
So I think it's worth touching on what the Bucks were probably planning to do before Dame got injured, because you mentioned it. They saved a lot of money ahead of last year's deadline. That's the Middleton for Kuzma swap. I would say it was like probably like not the sole reason they did it, but it's like probably like, one of the big, it was mostly, I would say mostly financially motivated. Yeah. Where it got them below the second apron, but also it put them in a really nice position. I'm looking at their cap sheet right now where they've been in the luxury tax for, I believe, 5 years in a row now. So the last 2 years, they've been paying really heavy penalties. And they were setting themselves up, and this is largely thanks to the way the cap has been rising, where not only are they going to like reduce these payments, but stay below the second apron and also outright duck the tax for the first time. So they were in a position to have Giannis and Lillard on their maxes, 35% maxes. Then Kuzma is like the third highest paid guy, around 22. And then if you assume all the guys with player options, Portis, Connaughton opt in, you could still have plenty of room below the tax where you could bring back Brook Lopez. You can probably use like a good portion of your mid-level. Okay, maybe you stay good over the tax a little bit, but that's kind of what they were looking at. As far as doing trades, I'm not too sure what more they can do without trading that first that you mentioned. I think right now that's not really something they should really seriously consider right now. But now, like, I think I really have thought more and more about it because now, with as far as what they can salvage, now that Dame is hurt, I just really struggle to see how they can make it competitive. So obviously, like, so at this point, if Giannis is staying, it's not really necessarily because they have like a one of the strongest chances to make it out of these. It's probably for other reasons, and I'd
Yeah.
respect that. Um, so yeah, how do you remain healthy? They would have, they could have done, they definitely could have done something to retool the roster a little bit. Maybe they could have even considered trading Dame. I think I saw some reports last year they were gonna like approach him about like how he felt about things, and then you could have broken up his 54 million into maybe a couple players, and maybe that could have gotten the Bucks into a position where, with the East as wide open as it is, yeah, that could actually be somewhere, so a little more conceivably competitive. But now, unfortunately, with Dame, it's 54 million in dead money effectively. I already struggled to find the market when he was healthy. Now, when looking at some of the what it would take to get off him, probably that first they have left, I just don't think that's really quite worth it. I don't think they're really going to get enough where it makes trading that pick worth it. Obviously, we've seen the Bucks pull some magic over the past 5 years, like with the Drew trade, with the Dame trade. Like those were really unexpected, and those they still managed to pull that off. So who knows? Yeah, but I just can't see now how, like, what they can do to put them on par with the Cavs, Knicks, Pacers. So I understand. I'm sure, and I'm sure internally the Bucks understand this. So I'm just kind of curious now at this point, to what degree they might even want to reset things, to what degree they might feel interested in parting ways. Not that they're going to push for that. I don't think they're going to like approach that, but especially because once you lose Giannis, like that's going to sting. They might never get a guy like that again. So I'm kind of curious to like how internally, how much they feel like maybe they do think it's best to move on.
Well, I mean, realistically, even if Giannis says like, I- I'm not going out like we did, I want to kind of run it back and continue to push and blah blah blah, right? I mean, the trade stuff is never going to go away, right? It'd be, unless the Bucks are some shocking, early season surprise, it's going to be people speculating, oh, but by the trade deadline, is Giannis going to want out? And then it'll happen next summer. And a year from now, if he's at that point, he's got 1+1 left. His value, especially a year older, is going to go down. So yeah, I mean, I think there's a version of the world where I'm sure where the Bucks, like in private moments, probably look at it and say, if he's going to want to leave, right? And this is the best player in franchise history. Like I said, you can, I think, objectively say, as you're alluding to, it could be best for the team long term if they can, basically just turn him into future assets and players and young players and all that, right? But he's Giannis, I mean, I was in the building to see him win a championship. I never thought I would see the Bucks win a championship in my lifetime. He's just one of those handful of guys in the history of the sport who I think kind of just for their given franchise, I think on some level just say like you're never going to trade him unless he's the one that drives it, which I think is what you were alluding to earlier, and I think that's right. And again, maybe that makes me a homer, but I think it does put the Bucks obviously in a difficult spot because they're just going to continue to face sort of these same questions, every year, given where this roster is likely to be and the competitiveness of the roster over the next couple of years, which, I mean, Giannis, it's hard to say, like, just assume Giannis is going to be like a LeBron type guy who, continues to dominate and is like an MVP level guy into his, mid to late 30s. He is right now at the age of 30. But you never know, right? He's been fairly healthy, other than unfortunately in the playoffs. It seems he's gotten these like random dings at the last, not this year, but the prior couple of years, obviously limited him. But yeah, so they're just in a tough spot. And how do you reset around him? I mean, you've already traded Chris Middleton. So as you're alluding to, like the only other big thing you can do is trade Damian Lillard. But obviously, unless like Brad Beal waives his no trade clause like that's like the ultimate level of desperation, I feel like. Do you start entertaining ways to add Brad Beal? That's like the ultimate level of NBA team desperation, probably. But
I've
apparently the
thought
Bucks
about
did
that
have at least
deal.
some yeah, apparently the Bucks had some conversation about Beal a couple years ago before he went to Phoenix. But yeah, I mean, other than that, like, in what world are you trading Dame? Like, you're not, right? You basically you're just sitting on him until he becomes, I think, an expiring contract in a couple of years, I think. But
Yeah.
um, so yeah, it's just a really tough spot they're in. And so I think if he asked out, obviously it would give them, I think, a much clearer sort of purpose and MO in terms of, rebuilding. But even that is very difficult because they don't obviously control their draft picks over the next few years. And I think that's also kind of like baked into the reason to keep him and the reason to just like continue to just try to compete as well as you can, even if that, isn't title contention as you've
Yeah.
obviously been hoping these last few years. So yeah, it's, I mean, this is again the Drew trade and the Dame trade, like those were huge gambles. The Drew trade paid off in a championship. The Dame trade obviously got Giannis to sign an extension. So it was a success in that regard, even despite the fact that the last 2 years have been very disappointing. But yeah, like the net of that now is you have an injured Damian Lillard and a whole lot of draft capital that is in the wind. So it puts him in a tough spot. And John Horst certainly has his work cut out for him in terms of kind of restocking the cupboard with some of these young guys and that they've acquired these last couple of years. And then again, just trying to find kind of those cheap minimum guys, maybe even mid-level type guys this summer, where, as we said, they do have a little bit more flexibility as opposed to the last couple of years when they were right up against the second apron and it was basically minimums and that was it. But they need a lot more, and obviously how you conjure that from where they are is kind of well, I was gonna say mission impossible. I'm a big Tom Cruise mission impossible guy, Yossi, and that feels like an adequate framing for John Horst's job this summer.
Yeah, I'll be seeing it on Tuesday. Um, so let's just touch on what they could potentially do. Might as well just kind of go through that. So we already touched on, they could re-sign Lopez. They could use the mid-level to bring in, the best player they possibly could. They could now that they're below the first apron, they can do sign-in trades. They can bring in a free agent potentially. Like they literally any of the top free agents out there that's available, the Bucks can actually be in play through a sign-in trade. Everybody wants someone that the Wolves have, whether it's Naz Reid, Nickeil Alexander-Walker. Technically, the Bucks are kind of in play for those guys now. They couldn't have done that type of move in years past. And so there's a couple messages in the chat that do pertain to what the Bucks can do. First of all, yes, if AJ Dellinger asked if they use all those exceptions they have access to, the full mid-level, biannual, all the trade exceptions they generated last year, those will hard cap them to the first apron, just like doing a sign and trade. Either way, I wouldn't expect the Bucks to. They're probably going to operate below the first apron, potentially the tax as well, which is a little lower. They're going to be, whatever they do, they're going to be on somewhat more of a budget, but that's still fine. They have a lot more flexibility to do things. Unlike the last few years, they're mostly just like signing mid-level guys, maybe a guy for the tax mid-level. There wasn't a lot they could have done back then. They actually have more optionality now. Now here's Pedro 200 asks, what do you think Cam Johnson is attainable? Something that involves Kuzma. So here's another one of those types of deals. Yeah, like I do think I didn't like the Kuzma trade when it happened. Not liking it any better now. But if they were able to do like Middleton for Cam Johnson back then for without trading a first round pick, yeah, that would look way the whole, saving money and then like, getting a little younger for a similar player, that would have changed the entire. That would have changed a lot of the outcome. I don't know if they wouldn't have beaten the Pacers, but that would have been a much different trade. But that would probably now require like their 2032 first round pick, 2031 or 2032. I I think that's a bit too much. And especially considering that if you're going to trade Dame, that might require pick. Like any of these big trades you're going to do is probably going to require a team. Another opposing team might require a pick just to like just to be interested. So it's going to be really the real challenge is that like, yes, the Bucks could do something that gets them in a much better position. They're not going to be able to do everything, if that makes sense. And that's kind of where the buck stops there, so to say. Like they could do some things, but they're not. It's still going to be a very flawed roster, and then you just got to weigh like, is it really worth it to further double, triple down on this pick deficit you have? So, it's just tough. I'm not sure how they're gonna. Which kind of just defaults to me thinking that they should trade him. We'll see what he says, but that's kind of where I'm at.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're kind of stuck with Kuzma, to be honest. Just, and he was like okay, at least during the regular season with them. He didn't shoot well from three, which is like a huge problem, especially if you're trying to put him on the floor with Giannis as a three, right? Like, I mean, no, everybody's going to live with Kyle Kuzma shooting open threes if he's shooting, 28% from the field or whatever it is. I thought his attitude was good. That's kind of what made it sad, to be honest. Like he clearly wanted to make it work. I think he showed some things defensively that I certainly didn't see from him, in Washington. But just the offense, like the joke I had with a couple buddies was that he's an elite miscreator. And by that I mean like, he can get any shot off he wants, and unfortunately, like it's usually not going in. And the other part too is it feels like he's just as likely to hit a highly contested step back three as he is like a wide open three, which is really not great when you're playing a guy with Giannis, because you want him to be a threat that you don't want to leave open. And instead, Kuzma's he's just so erratic. And other than like when he got to like these like weird little like going to his right little runners, which he seems abnormally good at, like everything else just kind of like didn't kind of come together. And he's not obviously like an elite playmaker or anything like that either. So yeah, it was just really tough. So I think they're kind of stuck, honestly, with him. And as much as he was like okay during the regular season after the trade, I mean, he starts the Pacers series with just a colossal, epic all-time zero everything game. And that kind of set the tone, obviously, for the rest of that series. But he had been, getting benched in crunch time late in the season as well. And, unfortunately, the kind of writing was on the wall that like, yeah, okay, this guy won a championship with the Lakers, but like, go look at his numbers in those series with the Lakers. Like, he wasn't actually very good in most of the series. Like, there's a big difference between being like a 6-man kind of guy that, occasionally can be a wild card type dude versus like, you just got traded for Chris Middleton and now like you're the nominal third wheel behind Dame and Giannis. And obviously he just wasn't up for that type of task. So I think they're just kind of stuck seeing if he can kind of get to a better place this year, make some more threes and, find some sort of better, cohesiveness with whoever's left from the roster. Because as you said, like short of putting the 2031 pick, like I don't know what you're getting for him. Like, would that even be enough to get Cam Johnson? I'm not sure it would, but
I think it might.
But it's hard to say. Maybe, yeah.
I think
Cam
it
Johnson
might
is
be
like what? Cam
just a
Johnson's
lot.
sneaky old too, right? Isn't he like? Yeah. But certainly be a lot better than Kyle Kuzma, that's for sure.
Yeah. So I mean, this is a good segue to then, let's say they do, Giannis does decide he wants to be traded, or at least is open to a trade. I think the next most interesting thing is what kind of direction would the Bucks go about that? Especially because one of the big dangers of trading another first round pick now is that they already don't have control of their draft through 2030. So if they decide that if a trade has been decided that that's what's going to happen, do you see, obviously they'll try to get the best of both worlds. I think they'll want to try to stay competitive and then also get all the draft picks they can, get the massive haul as big as possible. But if they had to pick one or the other, do you think they're more likely to prioritize like a veteran base package that can keep them as competitive as possible given their draft pick deficit, or can they maybe prioritize somewhat of a retool, a rebuild, where not only they get extra draft picks back, but maybe their own, which would probably involve the Pelicans, because they have control of their draft over the next 2 years.
I mean, of course, the Bucks answer would be why not both? Right? Like, the team I always come back to is like the team. If Giannis tells me tomorrow that he wants to move to a team that has a better chance of competing, and I'm John Horst, the first place I would look would probably be Houston, because I think they've got, the combination of young talent that I think can help keep you competitive, in the short term. I don't think you're going to be competitive in terms of, like threatening for a second round playoff series or something like that. But can you at least be in the mix for, certainly the play-in or maybe an outright playoff seed? Like maybe not next year, but maybe within a couple of years if some of the guys pan out. And obviously they've also got, a haul of picks. And they've also got enough guys that you could potentially see exactly what you're alluding to, some sort of three-way where some picks or players get rerouted to New Orleans, and the Bucks reacquire, some of the draft rights that they have that they dealt to the Pelicans as part of the Drew trade. Which, hey, it was worth it. They won a championship, but now obviously you're kind of paying the piper on that here, given kind of where they are. So yeah, I think though I would definitely be surprised though if they, I went for some sort of deal which was like essentially like all the value was in picks. I just don't see that, because you don't have the benefit of bottoming out and helping your own draft picks again, unless you get some of the New Orleans draft capital back, which is largely why, like, I've never understood why Brooklyn's been in the discussion. I know they have, like, they're the team that has the most flexibility this summer, and they are, a destination, but it just, like, the idea of Giannis wanting to go play with question mark and thinking he's better off playing there in the first place. With Cam Johnson, he must really like Cam Johnson, I guess, if he were to go there. But then you'd think Cam Johnson would be in the trade coming back. But yeah, I think the Rockets are always the first team I think of, just because, you can go in and say, like, give me Amen Thompson, give me, I know there's been debate, like, would they want Jalen Green or Şengün? Obviously, Şengün's been the overall better player. But if I'm the Rockets, do you try to push Jalen Green because, you don't feel as good about him as you do Şengün? I could definitely see the Bucks like saying, that's fine. We'll take, he can be our nominal 20-point per game guy that kind of puts butts in seats or whatever it might be. And, if you can get Amen, that's obviously probably the big question mark. None of the Rockets fans obviously want to think that they would give up Amen Thompson in a trade for Giannis. And it's like, yeah, I saw your offense in the playoffs, guys. Like, you need somebody who has, firepower. So that's the place I always start. I am curious, Yossi, like, who else? I think you've talked about, obviously, Giannis trade destinations. I don't think there's many places that sort of have the combination of assets for the Bucks, enough talent for Giannis to play with. And then I think there's also, maybe, I don't know if people fully appreciate it, but, like, look, I love Giannis, life altering talent for me as a fan. I will root for him wherever he goes. But, like, Giannis has an ego. Like, he doesn't want to go be somebody's wingman. He doesn't want to go be like, I think even going to, I'm sure he looks at what happened with KD going to Golden State and being the better player, but still not really getting the respect of fans after winning with Steph. I'm sure he looks at what he did in Brooklyn, kind of gambling with Kyrie and being hugely disappointing when they didn't win anything, and looks at those situations and kind of thinks how he avoids that kind of thing. Even like a team like the Knicks, who I'm sure could really use him. I think there's big questions about what the Knicks could offer the Bucks that, would be better than other teams. But it's like, even there, like, that's Jalen Brunson's team, and it's a kind of interesting, like, with Giannis, I think he wants it to be his team. And he's a great teammate. He's obviously an incredible player, but like he has an ego. I think he likes being the center of attention right now as well, which I think is part of the reason why he's not saying anything to dissuade people from talking, and which is why he's been doing a lot of like Instagramming and whatever, because I think he likes actually being the center of attention for a bit. But I would be curious to know kind of what your thought is on teams that could be viable places, because like the Spurs are the other team I think that has like that kind of war chest. But I don't know if Giannis honestly would want to play with Wemby. I don't know if Wemby would want to play with Giannis just from an ego perspective. I feel like nobody ever talks about that side of it, but I think those guys respect each other a ton. But it is an interesting dynamic when you bring together a guy of Giannis's caliber going to a team that has like their own superstar, right, or future superstar that they're building around.
So you're saying you can rule out Giannis of the Warriors, basically.
Well, not really because of Steph, because obviously Steph's not the same guy anymore. But I don't know what the heck. I'm sorry, Jonathan.
Yeah, no, I know what you mean.
Trade, like,
yeah,
not
no,
really.
I mean,
really gonna.
I know what you mean. Though it's a really interesting thing, though, about like the whole ego aspect. No, I never heard anyone talk about that. So, I mean, that's the one situation I could think of when you bring that up, because that's always going to be Curry's team. We've seen what happened with when KD went there. I mean, with Spurs, it's hard to tell since Wemby's still so young. Yeah, it's going to be really curious to see that if Giannis is open to a trade, how much that factors in. Because maybe some of these obvious teams we're looking at, yeah, maybe he's not quite as interested. As far as, there's basically three routes they can go about it, which, A is you get the best of both worlds. But let's just say that's not really on the table. That's basically the Houston deal. We might as well, I'll just go through it. The Houston deal, and you get New Orleans involved. It'd be the type of thing where New Orleans gives the Bucks their picks back, and maybe for their troubles they get like Şengün or some future draft picks, something like that, and then the Bucks get some Rockets players that they might be undervalued, and they could help them a lot, help them make the playoffs. You get your own picks back. Maybe you get the Pelicans 7 pick or that Rockets 10 pick from the Suns. I think that's like probably like the best case scenario realistically the Bucks can get. And like maybe you get like 2-3 guys from the Rockets to make that work. Then there's like the draft picks only thing, which the Nets, that is kind of contingent on them being able to get another guy right after. And
Yep.
if you're trading half your picks to get Giannis and then probably half your picks to get another guy, we don't even know who that is. Yeah, what do you have left if you're the Nets? There's a lot of obstacles for that, I think, to work. But the Spurs one would probably be more draft pick heavy, because I think they're going to try to trade more. If they're involved in Giannis, they're going to try to keep as many of their guys as they can and just try to trade picks if possible. And that's also still another way the Pelicans could get involved. So that's probably a little more draft pick heavy. And then that's more so you've decided you're going to retool, you're going to rebuild, you're getting these picks back, you're going to take a step back. Because once you get your own picks back, the 26 swap gets extinguished, you get your 27 unprotected back. That really relieves a lot of pressure to try so hard, because the other way is you only get veterans. And like one of my favorite example that I came up with, that I doubt that's going to happen now, but like let's say the Pacers, I'm guessing they're going to lose to OKC. What if they can do something like Pascal Siakam, Benedict Mathurin, Jarris Walker, Obi Toppin? So that'll make the money work. You get a lot of guys, and then they could still trade like 3 firsts on top of that, which probably won't be that valuable, but you know what? You're getting some first. The issue with that is still the Dame situation, where you still have him making $54 million and you're kind of stuck with that. So it's kind of risky to do that type of move, even if it was available. And a Knicks potential package would probably be in that same kind of vein, without minus the picks. It's still kind of risky. I don't know how good you're going to be to the point where maybe it just I kind of see these Nets parallels. Like obviously there's a big difference between the Nets last year being as bad as they were with Mikal Bridges being their best player versus the Bucks still being a pretty good team with the second best player in the league on your roster. But I just I I feel like the best way forward, and again, this is obviously has a lot more uncertainty, is you try to get a high lottery pick and through a trade for this draft. Get your own picks back. So now you have this year, next draft, and the following draft to try to find your next guy. And maybe you got some extra draft picks as well. Maybe you got some nice young players along the way. And hopefully by 2027, you're good to go. Because then, guess who has your picks then? Portland. Hopefully you're good enough where you don't need to make like a deal with them to try to like get those picks back. So, yeah, just a lot of different ways they can go about it. And so yeah, I would say like if they can, they get the best of both worlds. If they had to choose one or the other, I would say they should probably focus on the future. But I don't know. I don't know how that, I'm curious to know how they feel about that organizationally. Maybe they just want to stay as relevant as possible and and bet that their own picks won't even be that good. So I'm just very curious. I don't know what I wish I wish I knew what how they're thinking they would go about a trade if a trade's gonna happen.
Yeah, I mean the dynamic is interesting with ownership as well because obviously ownership, I mean, this was a team that, when they had their first run to the East Finals, there was all the talk of like, well, are they actually gonna like pay the luxury tax, or are they just gonna be, the team that never wants to pay the tax? And um, it was interesting when PJ Tucker didn't resign after the championship. A lot of people immediately were like, "Oh, look, they're going cheap." But then basically every opportunity they had thereafter, they spent money. They never kept like the 15th roster spot open to save money. Like they pretty much just always maxed out, what they could spend more or less. Including obviously going deep into the tax. Yeah, I forget what the numbers were, but 50, 60, 70 million, upwards of 50, 60, 70 million in luxury tax payments, and just running these huge payrolls. And, I give ownership a lot of credit because Milwaukee is not, you would not have predicted that, the Bucks would be one of the teams that essentially would be one of the targets of the new Apron rules, basically, right? But, they may not have been the team everybody had in mind, but they've obviously been a team that has been majorly impacted by that over the past couple of years, and to the point where, do they make that trade with Chris Middleton? If not for the second apron, probably not, right? Or at least not for Kyle Kuzma. I think if it was just a matter of paying a little less tax, I don't think they'd do it. But just given the constraints that they would have had this summer as well, I think that definitely did play a big factor. So yeah, and you have Jimmy Haslam who came in after the championship. So he's known nothing but first round losses and he's paid huge payrolls. The other owners won the championship with this team. And so they obviously are in sort of a different boat in terms of their whole history with the franchise and everything else. So yeah, it just sets up a really, I'd say, difficult to predict dynamic. And I think, the word was that, they kind of ownership, quote unquote ownership, who from ownership, unclear, but the talking points were that ownership kind of got sick of paying Chris Middleton a ton of money when he wasn't available a whole lot. Well, congratulations, now you've got more salary cap flexibility, but you got to watch Kyle Kuzma do basically nothing in the first round of the playoffs. So, there's trade-offs that obviously come with all this stuff. So yeah, they're obviously one of those teams. I think that, the direction they ultimately go in with the Giannis situation is ultimately going to be, maybe the biggest storyline of the summer for the NBA, which is not obviously the way that they would want to be the big storyline of the NBA summer, but it is what it is. And if Giannis comes back, then obviously they've got some flexibility to kind of add some pieces around him. But it's like we're talking about, like, can they add Dennis Schroeder, like that type of stuff, not can they add like a big time talent to kind of help Giannis compete for a championship. But I don't know. I mean, it's also, I mean, you just never know. I mean, the East is in a weird place especially with the Tatum injury. So I don't think they're going to compete for a conference championship regardless of what happens. But are there versions of the world, where things break against other teams and, you can be a 4 or 5 seed? Like, I don't know, maybe that's possible, right? I'm never going to count Giannis out just given how brilliant he is, but they're definitely a team at a crossroads for sure.
And look, we can relitigate whatever a lot of the stuff they've done in the past 5 years. They haven't been perfect. They've done a lot of stuff that helped the team improve. They've done a lot of stuff to the detriment, but I think when looking back at everything, we can agree that they've done just about everything right as far as Giannis is concerned. I think they've done everything right by him every step of the way. You touched on the Drew trade, that being the deal that got him to extend the first time, and the Dame trade got him to extend the second time. And I feel like this now in hindsight, okay, maybe the trade hasn't worked quite as well. I'm sure the Bucks probably, if they could go back, they'd reconsider things. But at the same time, he signed that extension, and had he not signed that extension right now, we'd be in the situation. He'd be facing a player option decision right now had he not extended. Maybe there's a possibility that they could have not done that trade and he would have extended last year anyways, and then he'd have 4 years left on his deal. But either way, Giannis has held up his production. He's held up, which means he's held up his trade value, and now he's got multiple years left on his deal. So the Bucks they're in a I think they're in a pretty good spot. Like, even though they have this draft pick deficit, they don't really have any young players to look forward to. I think Giannis's trade value is strong enough, and they've done all the right moves to position themselves to reverse a lot of that. So if they trade him, so I want to ask you one last question, and it should be a pretty quick one. But let's say, and I think there's a very good chance of this happening. But let's say Giannis is like very much like indifferent about a trade. He's equally interested in staying as he is getting traded. If he's gonna stay in Milwaukee, great. He's gonna be happy. If they want to trade him, he'll respect it and welcome the opportunity. If he was like exactly 50-50 on it, just like whatever goes, what do you think the Bucks would do if he gave them like that free pass, so to speak?
It's interesting, right? Because I think all of us have been sort of banking on him kind of having a binary, like, I want to stay or I want to go, and kind of taking that decision out of the Bucks' hands. Um, I don't think the Bucks would, to the point you made at the start of the pod. I don't think the Bucks, given what he's meant to this franchise, given who he is, and given the fact that whatever success you could have over the next couple of years, it's probably going to be your best chance of having any success is probably by keeping him. Again, not saying you're going to compete at the highest level for a championship, but you're probably going to be best off the next couple of years in that regard. I don't think they would actively pursue a trade for him. But it does, I think, create uncomfortable conversations to the points that we were having earlier, just about, okay, 1 year from now, then what? Then his trade value is lower. And does he come at that point and say, I want out? Or, does something else happen? Does he get injured, right? God forbid. And then you're in, obviously, the horrible position that you're in now with Dame, where his trade value is diminished, and you miss him out for your. And by the way, the darkest night I had as a Bucks fan was the night he injured his knee against the Hawks in the Eastern Conference Finals in 2021, because literally we were having these sorts of discussions about, is he gonna miss next year? Your chance to win a championship just got extinguished, and he's out all of next year. And then what does the future hold, right? So that was like the kind of near death experience we had with him as fans, before ultimately he incredibly came back from that and won a championship. So yeah, bottom line, I would guess the Bucks wouldn't trade him. But to all the discussion we've had, I think there's certainly an argument that, long term, it would be in their best interest, just again, kind of thinking beyond the next year or two. But it's an interesting,
Yeah.
question, right? With a franchise legend like this who's meant so much and who's, still, like you said, one of the top one or two players in the world. Um, how do you actively try to trade a guy like that, right? Ask Nico Harrison, I
Yeah.
guess would be the answer.
I mean, we just saw what happens when you trade a guy that is so beloved by the fans and the guy didn't really want to get traded.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like how can you trade a guy that doesn't like him, that doesn't want to be traded? Yeah, that would put them in a position where they're gonna have to. Yeah, they can't do that. That could really, we're seeing right now what's going on in Dallas for having done that. But as far as yeah, like you mentioned in the very beginning, the process, it's just important. Like, they're the reason this is taking as long as it is, and I still don't anticipate any decision until at least draft night, and I wouldn't be surprised if it's even later than that. It's got to be they if even if they want to do it, it's got to be in the end coming from him. They can't do it any other way. So I guess time will tell to see if we get to that point. But Frank, I think we covered just about everything. Still a lot of uncertainty, and hopefully we get a couple more updates in the coming weeks. But thank you for joining. This was a blast. Do you have anything coming up we should be on the lookout for?
Well, Yossi, we didn't have our big AJ Green extension conversation, which we could have gone 30 minutes about, I'm sure. But yeah, those are the kinds of fun things that we cover on Locked On Bucks, right? Is all the minutia of a roster that, let's say, the national media and maybe kind of general NBA fans maybe wouldn't have as quite as much interest in. So we can only talk about Giannis kind of drama so much. So a lot of other questions about this team, and there are at least a
Yeah.
there are at least a few interesting players that we like outside of Giannis. But yeah, it's the whole summer is gonna kind of obviously pin on what he decides, or as we were saying, maybe it's what he doesn't decide, which he can not decide anything for the next 3 months, and that would be his prerogative too.
Yeah. It's just impossible to really talk about the future of some of these guys. Like, they have a lot of extension eligible guys. I think Dame is actually technically going to be extension eligible. Kuzma, everybody, like literally everyone on the roster, all the vets, AJ Green, you mentioned, they're all extension eligible. And it just, you can't even like delve into that until we know what's going to happen. Cause like whether he stays or goes, that'll impact if they're even going to be on the roster. But yeah, everyone, make sure to follow Frank on Twitter, Blue Sky at FMaddenNBA, and listen to him talk regularly about the Bucks. He's gonna get more, as he said, he'll get more into like the nitty gritty about other decisions the Bucks have. Subscribe to Third Apron, my newsletter on Substack. I will get into all that like salary cap dynamics as well. I'll probably get into potential extensions on all these guys, trade market. They got some free agents. We even talk about what Brook Lopez's market could look like. They got some restricted guys, Ryan Rollins, Jericho Sims. Like, there's actually like a lot of other stuff, but yeah, we can't really it's really hard to get there yet. So, yeah, hopefully we just get some updates soon. And thanks again, Frank. Make sure you're following me on Blue Sky and Twitter on my name, Yossi Goslin. Subscribe to me on YouTube, Spotify, Apple on my name as well. Subscribe to Third Apron. I'll get into the Bucks salary cap stuff a little later, and I'll be back this week. I've got a couple